Looks like an excellent schedule. Some really good presentations. So I guess, yeah, to start off, I'm going to present on the paper Polly just mentioned, which was nominated for an award at ESIS, European Conference of Information Systems. So in particular, it's looking at intergroup participation, distributed software development projects, with the subtitle Reviving Established Tradition for New Contexts. So to provide a bit of background to the research, interestingly, participation research is one of the founding topics of information systems as a discipline. And even more interesting is that it really showcases, I think, the synergy that can come between research and practice. So the research area dates back nearly 5 decades at this stage, but really showcasing how researchers and practitioners working together can challenge how practice is conducted. So I asked scholars, particularly from the north of Europe, began working with practitioners and started to challenge conceptions around how systems were developed. And the influence of this research is seen today, where particular agile methods such as Scrum, rapid application development, extreme programming, all have this element of participation at the core, which is really about engaging users, different stakeholders, managers, all in the process of building a system. But where the opportunity for further research has come in is that although we talk a lot about participation, there's still some ambiguity around what it means. And we use the word, but maybe we don't always understand how we do it. And also the emergence of new contexts is really brought that to the fore as well. So particularly, we've all experienced this some leap to remote working. Another term for that is distributed teamwork, where we're collaborating across different locations using different mediums such as video conferencing, but all participating towards a shared objective. And one of the unique features, particularly about distributed teams, is the diversity of the group. So commonplace today when developing systems, you're working with people across different countries, even within the country, different locations, different organizations. And this creates a certain amount of socio-political tension, whereby we all come with different perspectives on how we should work together. And this can create things like power relations or differences of perspectives on how we achieve our shared objective. So what we learned from our research, the paper itself is available online and is mentioned in the title slide. So if you want to go there and read some more, and I'm more than happy as well to speak further about it, but I'll just give you a little brief synopsis. So we drew on literature, particularly from sociology, some very respected works from the past, to gain insights and apply that theory into present day work environments. And particularly looking at the socio-political aspects, some factors really came to the fore when we were trying to understand in distributed contexts the type of factors which affect how we participate. So I'll mention 3 of these. There are 2 others mentioned in the paper, but the first is rules. So particularly when we're working distributed teams, we often see the emergence of teams within the teams. In the project which this paper is based on, it was that of IT professionals and clinicians in the hospital. And what we found is that particular decision-making rules really affect participation. So on the clinician side, a big emphasis on top-down hierarchies, where decisions could not proceed or be finalized until the most senior clinician had the final say. Versus on the IT professional side, more used to much more flat hierarchy and using very quick decision-making processes where everyone could have a say. And this creating some tension then in how we actually gather requirements and how we finalize designs. In terms of resources then, seeing differences of expertise and how that shaped conversations. So when it came to any kind of clinical conversations, we saw the clinicians carrying a lot of weight and credibility in that area, and vice versa with IT professionals. But the difficulty, because this wasn't a clinical project or wasn't an IT project, having to balance that distribution of power and understand the resources we're bringing in when we work together. And then values, what we actually come to projects in terms of perspective on meaning and things, how we prioritize different ways of working. So again, the clinician side, the need for a much more phased approach and staged approach, where we sometimes hold back our participation so we can reflect, and then we come back and we have our say on what the developers have put forward. Versus IT professionals coming in, valuing a much more iterative approach, very quick feedback, but also some structure that when we say we've settled on a date when requirements are finalized, we stick to that date. So both groups, in using kind of the terminology of system development today, both groups kind of showcases some agility or understanding of agility, but different takes on it. So like I say, IT professionals, quick iterations, but for our clinicians, it was more, we want to see prototypes, but we then want to hold back and we don't want to make a final decision until we know everything. So these factors interplay, and I guess unique to distributed context, as I say, the diversity of team members creates certain tensions. So using this theoretical basis, came to understand particularly the project that I mentioned, which I'll speak to just in the slide coming up, allowed us to understand that project a bit better and how teamwork actually happened. And then secondly, so as I mentioned in the first slide, we talk about participation, but oftentimes we use it as kind of this nebulous term that we're maybe not 100% sure what we mean when we say it. So again, drawing on theory and existing literature, this time in information systems, we drew on a theoretical model which was published in the top information systems journal. And straight away, we kind of it resonated with us that we were able to take this and understand a bit better how participation actually works. So particularly, it presents 3 modes of participating: adding, challenging, and ignoring, which I guess kind of cover the different types of interactions we can have. So adding is where I contribute something and the rest of the team internalize it, preserve it, and then we build our knowledge together. Challenging, in contrast, is more like a form of task conflict where I contribute something, but then other team members don't internalize it, but instead transform it. So we maybe have different perspectives, and hearing the contribution of another person, we then say, I don't agree with that, here's what I think. And we're still moving the conversation forward in doing so. The third type, ignoring, which is a little bit more difficult to understand, but basically in this case, I contribute something, but it's just not taken forward. It's for reasons either that it's not received or it's just not recognized as valid. So in this project, adding was very much enabled by a blended approach of having face-to-face workshops where we were meeting for roughly 6 hours for one dedicated day and using different design tools such as journey maps, personas, to sit down and actually talk through aspects of the user's journey, in this case the patient, and how we came to understand that. The online interactions then support that, and that we would go and use asynchronous media typically, so things like email, Jira, where we'd be keeping the conversation going over the week and using those interactions to continue how we build knowledge. Similarly challenging was support in this way as well. Design tools were crucial. Having things like journey maps, having the visualization of what the journey of the user, again, the patient, looked like, really brought very unique insights into how we came to understand requirements and eventually the system we would build. Ignoring, though, was probably the most interesting aspect which came out of this project, and that what we actually discovered was ignoring was actually a means of gaining power, that sometimes withholding your participation was a means where you could control the project. And in this project, the clinicians sometimes withholding their feedback allowed them to gain what we refer to as power of the veto, whereas at a later date, they could come back and decide, or simply state, I didn't agree to this. You didn't get my feedback. Whereas for the IT professional side, it was a case that interactions were constantly happening. We just weren't getting it back from the clinicians. In addition, talking back to the factors, socio-political factors, the aspect of power is really crucial here. And even though we can set up these workshops, we can facilitate online interactions, we have to be cognizant of who has the loudest voice in the room. And for the clinicians, again, it was the senior clinician, which proved to be very problematic given her multiple roles across the hospital, and teaching in research centers. So getting her time was very difficult, but the problem being then junior clinicians weren't empowered to actually make decisions in her absence. And the challenging mode, which touches a bit on earlier research we've done as well, the importance of a certain amount of conflict, that we have someone in the room who's not just giving into groupthink, someone who's there and who is actively acting as, again, what we might call an agitator, who's saying, why do you think that? How about we look at it a different way? And here's what I think, and it's completely opposite to what you think. And it's been very important really for breeding creativity and challenging assumptions we may not be even aware of. And then finally, additional modes of participation, which we discovered as well in our research, was that of defining and finalizing. Two really, really crucial modes when it came again to this distributed context where we have team members who have no shared history and oftentimes are working on an objective which is quite exploratory with no kind of concrete foundation to build on. So defining is where we are engaging in greenfield conversations. In this project, vision building was crucial because team members were coming into the project not really fully understanding what the project was about. So starting off by defining and building a shared understanding of what this project would entail was really crucial. Whereas finalizing then is actually closing down conversations that at a certain point we also need to say, we've discussed this long enough, and now to actually progress the project, we need to close the door and move on. Particularly an issue when it's exploratory form of discussion, we do need to have a point where we say, if we don't close down discussions, we're going to compromise the effectiveness of the project. So the diagram on the right is just kind of showcasing the approach used, particularly like I mentioned, the blended approach of face-to-face and online, and the breaking up of tasks across those. So I can discuss that either separately in email or in question and answer session today. So how the research was conducted. So as Polly mentioned, this case was a project I worked on. So I was working as a practitioner in the project as an analyst, and I suppose then taking the step to going towards a PhD and being excited about that, I still had to bring the rigor to my understanding. So in conducting the research, following a rigorous case study approach, where we're trying to gain insights from multiple different perspectives. So drawing on firstly the wealth of observations, which as a practitioner I had from my time working the project, but also complementing that then with the views of others. So doing interviews with project team members and also analyzing emails and documents to triangulate or bring together those findings across different sources to better understand what the project was about. And then the next part, again, when it comes to rigor, the actual analysis. So coding, which effectively is, or essentially is taking the raw data, the sources across interviews, observations which were written up, and emails and other documents, and actually labeling each part of those transcripts to better articulate my understanding and our understanding as we went along. So in Vivo, a recognized system to help us with this and to maintain an inventory of codes, where again, we're showcasing the rigor, and when it goes to them publishing, that part is solid, and we can really informs the analysis as well. So very, very good for enhancing your reflection of the case. So my final slide is just to summarize. So the contributions, firstly, as I mentioned, socio-political factors break open this unique context, what some of the tensions can be when participating in distributed teams. And in the subtitle, going back to what this presentation was named, it effectively is reviving a tradition which has a very long history, going back, like I say, nearly 5 decades, but is in need of revisiting because we're now moving into new ways of working. Again, the lockdown, the pandemic, the assumptions we traditionally had of having everyone in the same room in a traditional or established department where we can meet weekly, that may not be as taken for granted as it once was. So opportunities for more research in this area, I think, the opportunities are ripe. So drawing on theory, those factors, so rules, resources, values, addition, interests and goals, which are in the paper. So that being one contribution. Then secondly, breaking open the black box of what participation is. So the modes, again, which are drawn from theory, adding, challenging, ignoring, and then 2 additional, which we discovered through our research, that of defining and finalizing. And next steps, so again, like Polly said, we were always moving forward with our research. We can never say, okay, job done, that's it, we understand everything. That's the most exciting part of research. There's always something to learn. So as part of work I'm doing with Polly and also Carl Keller, we're kind of taking forward this idea of participation and also the more broader concept of interactions between team members, and trying to understand how they're orchestrated. So if we think of the project manager as a conductor of a symphony almost, how they structure interactions to achieve certain value outcomes. So this is an area we're actively looking at. And also mentioned in the paper, like I said, this idea of teams within a team, so otherwise known as subgroups, how that affects participation. Particularly if we have one subgroup which is dominant, so that's, say, of clinicians over IT professionals. Typically in the past, we've seen literature talk more to IT professionals dominating users, but we've kind of seen the reverse here, that users dominate IT professionals. So looking a bit more into that and how certain modes emerge, how we can make those modes emerge. those being two areas which I'd also love to hear people's opinions on. And yeah, as I say, always exciting to hear other people's views, and also I'm looking forward to your presentations. So
good man, Steve.
That covers it. Yeah, thank you.
So fantastic. Anyone that wants to ask questions, guys, this chat, I see Gordon has come straight in, and Gordon's wondering what clinical area was this project focused on, Steve?
Yeah, so I didn't have a slide dedicated to this, but actually that I focused on, but I'll just bring up one here. So it was connected health, particularly within maternity healthcare. So the project was looking at how connected health devices, things like smartphone apps and medical devices which would connect to that smartphone app, like blood pressure monitors, could be used for tracking the health of expectant mothers, particularly around potential conditions such as hypertensive disorders, which could affect pregnancy. So part of that, we developed a smartphone app. We also developed an electronic health record prototype, which would log during a research study the health outcomes of expectant mothers.
Cool. So, and I know here there's maybe a question from Adrian as well, and it's maybe similar to when I wrote here. I suppose that some groups, and you mentioned maybe the clinicians were fairly hierarchical in their perspective, the way they do their business, and that's maybe I suppose instilled in their rules, their resources, the values, as you call them, and the technologists were very different. Now, you made 2 points, Steve. That one was diversity can lead to tension, and I'm sure in most people's heads they're saying tension is bad, but then you said a very important mode of participation is challenging. Is there a contradiction there, or is there value in challenging, or should we be, as project leaders or team leaders or organization leaders, trying to suppress challenging?
Yes, it's a great point. I think a very useful way to think about it is actually as a paradox. In other research, we've kind of drawn on this notion of paradox theory, which is trying to overcome this idea of either or, that it has to be one or the other, and looking more towards this both and idea. So in earlier papers, we were looking more at this idea of cohesion and conflict. So cohesion where we all agree, and that being important to move discussions forward, to agree deadlines, to work towards deadlines. But equally the need for conflict to be able to actually challenge groupthink, to challenge assumptions we have. So it is a balancing act. There are cases in projects which we've looked at where there was too much cohesion, particularly one with a company that there was very, very tight control of meetings, very few could speak up, and while it was excellent for outcomes like getting the project delivered on time, on budget, we saw a compromise of other things like innovation and value for the organization. So the paradox being here that you do also need some conflict. You do need someone speaking up and sometimes challenging. And even though it may short-term affect how we progress deliverables, it's also really key that we have those conversations to ensure long-term value. So
yeah, so that's really cool. So I think what we're saying is that in some cases hierarchical can be quite positive, though, especially delivering on time, on budget, and it's very clear who is the decision making. It's hard, but what you're saying, Steve, then when when there's a need for creating new value, maybe through innovation, that actually that probably doesn't deliver success, that you need to allow conflict. But a lot of us as leaders, that's the one thing we don't want is conflict. So I think that's a very interesting finding. And I can see another question here from Ken, interested in the difference in sense making between IT and clinicians. Is this something you will research more deeply?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned, this idea of subgroups, I think it's an underexplored area in system development teams in particular. It's kind of only, I'd say, I've seen the last 4 or 5 years that's started to be looked at. But absolutely. This kind of tribalism, in the way that you have certain ways of thinking, which can completely affect how we as a team, as a collective, actually operate. And also we've looked at this idea of identity. So in hopefully a forthcoming paper, we're looking at how my sense as a IT professional colors the world as I see it. And sometimes that collective can also disintegrate. So we end up becoming individuals. So that's another area we're looking into a bit more.
Yeah, and Bernard makes a very interesting point here, you know, that conflict cohesion is very interesting, though, and especially, and even more so now in COVID time, you know, compared to maybe pre-COVID. And it makes the point that it seems like our ability to have robust conversations got better without it creating ongoing tensions, you know. So, and I think that ties in with a lot of maybe what experts are saying in terms of responses to COVID itself, that we need to get out in front, grapple the nettle without having all the data, maybe make decisions that sometimes we didn't have all the data for, you know. So I'm just, I suppose, conscious of time, Steve. I know we could spend the rest of the morning even just talking about this paper and the research you're doing. I really appreciate you sharing it with us. And also, I know if you want to even include a link to your LinkedIn profile in the chat or something, Steve, feel free to do so if people want to link up with you or to follow up with the conversation afterwards. So feel free to maybe put it into the chat. So thanks again, Steve. You're a star.